Maybe what you feel is not sadness, but the pain of being disconnected from yourself, that feeling of emptiness you carry in your chest that accompanies you even on sunny days, even in triumph, has a deeper name than discouragement. Maybe it's the absence of yourself. Maybe it's the mourning of your former identity. Rumi said, "Don't look outside for what can only be cured inside." But what if what you call your spiritual awakening is actually the beginning of your downfall? What if the moment when everything seemed to make sense was the same moment when you started to fall apart inside? Have you ever felt like you were living on autopilot, even after having had a mystical, profound self-discovery experience? Have you ever wondered why, after so much searching for spirituality, meditating, and reconnecting with your soul, you feel more lost than ever? Why does purpose seem to have slipped through your fingers? Why has motivation disappeared, as if the universe has turned off the lights and left you alone? It's not weakness. It's not regression. It's the sacred gap between who you were and who you are still becoming. And nobody prepared you for this. What no one tells you about spiritual awakening is that it destroys. It destroys everything you thought was you. Your goals, your desires for approval, for success, for control. It strips away the layers of your soul until you are naked, raw, vulnerable to existence itself. And then comes the emptiness, the absence, apathy, the uncomfortable silence that makes you doubt whether you're really evolving or just going crazy in silence. You start looking at the same things that used to enchant you, and everything seems colorless. The conversations that once excited you now bore you. The people around you seem to speak a language your soul no longer understands. Do you feel it? It's not that you lost motivation, it's just that you lost the false why that guided you. And now you are on the verge of discovering a new one that comes not from the ego, but from the essence. This video is not about giving you ready-made answers. It's about lighting a candle in this dark room you're walking through. Because I know there are days when you wake up and think, what is the point of all this? And then you feel guilty for thinking that way. After all, you woke up, it is not. You should be enlightened, grateful, at peace. But inside, your soul screams in silence. What no one tells you is that spiritual awakening is also a death of artificial motivation, of the search for external meaning, of the need to be someone. And in this empty space where everything that once moved you no longer serves you, a new possibility is born. But before you are reborn, you need to cross over. You have to endure not knowing, accept nothingness, embrace the silence. Rumi wrote, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." Maybe you're at that point right now, with my heart already in pieces, not knowing if there is any way back from this. And that's precisely why this video exists. To remind you that you are not alone. To reveal to you what most people hide. True light only arises after darkness. So if you are unmotivated, aimless, in deep silence, maybe, just maybe, you are exactly where your soul needed to be. But why does this happen? Why does motivation disappear after waking up? And how to cross this dark valley without losing yourself? Stay with me until the end. Because what comes next, that's what no one has ever had the courage to tell you. Have you ever noticed how no one prepared you for this stage of the journey? Everyone talks about awakening, light, expanding consciousness, but almost no one talks about the emptiness that comes after, about the strange feeling of being awake in a world that still sleeps, about looking at everything that used to make sense and not feeling anything anymore. Have you ever felt this way? As if I had lost the ground, as if floating between two worlds, the old one, the one you no longer belong to, and the new, which has not yet been revealed? Maybe you're going through this right now. Maybe you're facing days when getting out of bed feels heavy, when nothing inspires, nothing vibrates, nothing touches. And it is at this point that many people give up on their spiritual journey. He mistakes this silence for failure, this pause for regression. But it is not regression, it's transition. It is the invisible process where your soul reorganizes itself. It is the moment when the old motivation dies, so that something much more true can be born. So I want to ask you something now. Write in the comments, "I'm crossing over." Simple as that. 3 words that carry an entire universe. Because when you write this, you acknowledge your pain. And when you recognize, you begin to heal. If this video is speaking to you, if this silent pain is yours, leave your like, not out of vanity, but because this simple gesture makes this message reach more lost souls like yours. Souls who also need to know they are not alone. And if this isn't the first time you've felt this sacred ache, this mysterious calling that no one understands, subscribe. Here, each video is a mirror, every word is a candle in the dark, and this journey is ours. You sought something greater. You believed that spiritual awakening would bring peace, clarity, and purpose. Everything seemed to point to an inner transformation that would finally bring meaning to your existence. You immersed yourself in books, meditations, rituals, and sacred practices. You did what you were taught. You became silent. You distanced yourself from those who didn't vibrate on the same frequency. You cleared your energies. You let go of old patterns. You felt the initial euphoria of someone discovering a new dimension of life. You felt the relief of realizing there is something beyond matter, beyond the rush, beyond the relentless search for external acceptance. For a moment, everything seemed to make sense. But suddenly, the silence began to scream. You look around and notice that the colors have faded. The places that once brought you joy now feel empty. Conversations have become superficial. People no longer see you the same way. And most frighteningly, you no longer recognize yourself. The motivation that once drove you is gone. The plans that seemed so important now seem distant, disconnected from who you're becoming. It's as if a part of you has died. But no one warned you that awakening is also this, a kind of silent mourning for the old version of yourself. The world around you continues to operate according to the same rules: goals, productivity, immediate relationships, quick gratification, constant distractions. But something inside you no longer fits. You begin to realize you're out of rhythm, as if your internal time is on a different frequency, and this disconnect hurts. It hurts deeply. It hurts as if you've woken up on a strange planet, where everything is familiar, yet at the same time, everything has lost its meaning. You begin to question everything: the job you have, the people you live with, the choices you've made, even what you believe to be love. Nothing feels right anymore. Nothing feels enough anymore. And this feeling of being lost after a spiritual awakening isn't weakness. It's not a mistake. It's not a sign that you've regressed. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. It's one of the greatest signs that you're truly awakening. Because true spiritual awakening isn't a fairy tale. It doesn't come wrapped in light and soft music. It comes like an earthquake. It shatters everything that wasn't real. And what's left afterward is this emptiness, which isn't absence but space. Space for the new to gradually begin to emerge. But this space is frightening, because human beings have been conditioned to fill everything, to always be busy, always motivated, always with a clear direction. We believe we need a solid purpose every day, goals, concrete plans, passion. But when the soul awakens, it dismantles this artificial structure. It takes you to a place where control no longer serves, where the ego no longer rules. And there, silence is born. This inner silence that so many people mistake for depression, apathy, weakness, but which in truth is the necessary pause between the old and the new. But the problem is invisible, because no one sees you going through it. You keep living, working, posting on social media, smiling when you need to smile. But inside, you're collapsing. Your soul is rearranging itself. It's trying to show you that the motivation that drove you wasn't yours. It was borrowed. It was learned. It was inherited. And now without it, you feel naked, disoriented, because no one taught you to live without an external motive. And the cruelest thing is that this crisis is silent. Almost no one talks about it. Those who do often minimize it, or turn it into self-help phrases that don't touch the real pain. But the pain is real. It's legitimate. It's sacred. Because it points exactly to the place your soul wants to take you, inward, toward the center, toward that which no longer depends on recognition, status, validation, or goals. A place where motivation is born from presence, not haste. A place where purpose needs no words because it is lived with every breath. Maybe you're in that place right now. A strange territory where nothing is clear, where everything seems slow, where emotions are confusing, and you start to doubt yourself. You start to think you've lost something, that you've done something wrong. that you're worse off than before, but you're not. You're closer to the truth than ever, the truth that can't be explained, only felt, the truth that doesn't scream, but whispers, and that's precisely where the true journey begins. Not one full of answers, but one full of presence, where each day is a step in the dark, but a true step, where the soul learns to walk without a map, and the heart begins to trust in the invisible. If you've read this far, if all this resonated with you, if this is your phase too, write in the comments now. I am between what I was and what I am becoming. Write this as an act of recognition, as an invisible seal between souls who meet on this silent path, because you are not alone. And this space between what no longer is and what has not yet arrived is also sacred. What no one tells you is that spiritual awakening isn't the end of pain. On the contrary, it's the beginning of truth. And truth, however liberating it may be before healing, it hurts. It tears away with its bare hands what you believe to be essential. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply enters, silently, and begins to dismantle what was a lie, what was ego, what was expectation disguised as faith. That's why it's so common for a spiritual awakening to be followed by a phase that feels dark, silent, and disconnected. Many feel like they've failed, that they've lost their way. But in truth, that's where the journey begins. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And that's exactly what's happening to you now. Your heart is breaking not because of something that went wrong, but because it's finally making room for reality. What once drove you, the dreams inflated by the desire for acceptance, the goals that served more to prove your worth than to express your soul, the need for certainty, all of this is dissolving. Not because they weren't important, but because they weren't true enough to sustain the new version of you that's emerging. This apathy you feel, this lack of motivation, this absence of pleasure in the things that once excited you, it's just the reflection of a soul that has stopped feeding on the illusions that drove it forward. You're not without energy. You're in transition. You're in mourning. A spiritual mourning, invisible, but as real as any other. A mourning for the version of yourself that died, the one that moved out of a need to be loved, to be useful, to be seen. The one that built dreams not for the soul, but for the fear of being forgotten. The one that believed that being spiritual meant being always at peace, always in a high vibration, always with a light heart. But now, that part of you is dying, and what's left is silence. But make no mistake, this silence is not empty. It is a seed. It is the dark womb where a new consciousness is born. But like any pregnancy, it is slow, confusing, and sometimes lonely. You may be feeling disconnected from everything, from others, from life, even from your faith. You may be wondering if you made a mistake somewhere, if you failed to do something. But what's happening is much deeper. You are failing to seek externally what can only be nourished internally. And that, yes, hurts. Because we were trained to chase, to conquer, to reach goals. And suddenly your soul says, stop, feel, listen. At this point, you can no longer move with the same motivations as before. What once got you out of bed no longer moves you. And this isn't a failure. It's a clear sign that you're no longer available to live a borrowed life. You're learning, the hard way, to respect the soul's timing. And the soul has a different timing. It doesn't rush. It doesn't force. It only blossoms when you allow it. And in this space between the death of the old and the birth of the new, everything seems too silent. But it's in this silence that healing begins. Rumi also said, "Do not turn away from your suffering, for it is the place where the light enters." And perhaps that's exactly what you're trying to avoid. This pain of not knowing who you are now. This feeling of floating aimlessly. This longing for something you haven't even experienced yet. But the truth is, the suffering you feel isn't the end. It's the passage. It's clearing away the layers that prevented your soul from breathing freely. It's removing the weights you carried out of emotional obligation. It's making room for you to finally stop acting and start truly existing. You feel all this because your soul is tired of lying to please. It's tired of smiling when it wanted to cry. It's tired of being strong when it only needed comfort. And now, without these masks, you feel vulnerable, almost naked. But it's in this vulnerability that the sacred reveals itself. Spiritual awakening isn't about becoming invincible. It's about allowing yourself to be whole, with light and shadow, with strength and fragility, with silence and truth. If you're there at this point, feeling like you've lost everything that gave you meaning, maybe you're exactly where you need to be. It's not that you've lost yourself, it's that you've finally stopped distracting yourself. And now, everything that was silent is coming to the surface. Don't fight it. Don't try to speed it up. Just feel it. Trust this grief. It's a sign that something inside you is breaking free. Something old, something trapped, something that no longer fits. And as paradoxical as it may seem, this dark phase is a blessing in disguise, because it breaks the heart, yes, but only so it can love again, more truly, because it dissolves old dreams, not to leave you directionless, but so you can dream of something truly yours. And it takes away your old motivation, not to paralyze you, but so you learn to move from the inside out. If this makes sense to you, if it touched a part of your soul, if it seems like this video is exactly translating what you feel, write now in the comments, "I am being reborn in silence." A small phrase, but it carries everything that needs to be said between those who have already died inside and are now beginning to truly live. What no one told you is that this emptiness you're feeling right now isn't a flaw in your process. It's not a sign that something went wrong. It's not a spiritual punishment, much less a regression. This silent space, this lack of motivation, this feeling of no longer knowing who you are, is exactly what needs to happen for the new to arrive. But no one talks about it, because everyone is busy trying to appear awake, happy, elevated, at peace, while inside many are silently breaking down. But you're not broken. You're in transition, and every transition requires a break. This gap is what I call the sacred gap, the invisible point between the version of you that died, the one that sought meaning in the external, that fed on approval, speed, achievement, and the new version that has not yet been born. This gap is silent, confusing, unsettling, because you are no longer who you were, and you still don't know who you are becoming. And this destabilizes you. It takes away your reference point. It makes you feel like you're lost. But the truth is, that ground never really existed. It was a construct of the ego. And now your soul is clearing everything that prevented you from touching your essence. Spiritual awakening empties you before it fills you. And most people give up at this stage, because it hurts, because it's scary, because it demands a surrender the ego doesn't know how to make. But if you stop now, if you try to return to your old motivation, you'll feel even more lost, because the soul doesn't retreat. Once you've seen what's behind the illusion, you can't unsee it. Once you've tasted the truth, everything superficial becomes bitter. That's why you feel this disconnect, because everything that once moved you no longer works. The old motives, success, acceptance, status, recognition, can no longer touch your soul. And yet, the new motive hasn't yet appeared. And in the meantime, you feel powerless, directionless, unanswered. But what's happening isn't a failure. It's a divine emptying, a process of spiritual cleansing. Because to be born again, you need to be empty. Because what comes now cannot occupy a space that's still filled with who you were. Rumi reveals, the wound is the place through which the light enters you. And this wound you're feeling now, this absence, this silence, this identity crisis, is precisely the portal through which the light is trying to enter. But it's a different light than you imagined. It's not a light that comes from outside. It's not a sudden euphoric illumination. It's a light that arises in the darkness, that reveals itself little by little, that ignites within the moment you stop fighting what you're feeling and begin to accept it. Accepting isn't conforming. It's not giving up. Accepting is trusting. It's understanding that even silence has a purpose, that even pain has a message, that even apathy can be a sacred pause, because the soul speaks at a different pace. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And those accustomed to the noise of the world often can't hear. But you're learning. You're being trained to hear what was previously imperceptible, and that changes everything. The hidden key isn't in trying to be who you were, nor in forcing a new self to be born prematurely. The key is in allowing the interval, in honoring the space between the end and the beginning, in stopping looking for motivation outside and starting to cultivate an internal presence, a stillness that doesn't depend on stimulation, a self-love that doesn't need performance, a faith that continues even when nothing seems to work. You are being invited to live a mature spirituality, not one that disguises itself as constant positivity, but one that faces the dark night of the soul with courage, one that doesn't need to constantly pretend to be enlightened, one that understands that emptiness is also a path, one that trusts that the soul knows what it's doing, even when the ego doesn't. It's natural for you to feel discouraged, for everything to seem stagnant, for the days to pass without you feeling any progress. But that's because real transformation doesn't happen on the surface. It happens on the invisible plane, and the invisible is in no hurry. The invisible respects the soul's timing. The invisible plants before it blooms. And perhaps at this very moment, your soul is planting something that will surprise you. But first, you need to trust the process. And trust hurts, because trusting is surrendering. It's letting go of control. It's allowing life itself to carry you, without guarantees. Perhaps what you're experiencing now isn't an end, but a womb, a gestation space, a territory where the old version of you is being gently undone, so that the new version can truly be born. But this new version doesn't come with manuals. It doesn't come with promises of success, pleasure, or recognition. It comes with presence, with depth, with silence. And you need to be willing to cross this bridge without knowing what's on the other side. Because what's on the other side is you. If this passage touched you in some way, if it touched a part of your soul that no one else sees, if it seems like I'm speaking exactly to you, then write now in the comments, I am between the end and the beginning. A simple phrase, but one that carries the power of someone who recognizes their own process. Because only those who honor the halfway point are ready to be reborn. Perhaps you wake up every day with a strange feeling of neutrality, as if the world has lost its color. You get out of bed because you have to, because there are obligations, schedules, commitments, but nothing, absolutely nothing, seems to truly move you. That flame that once drove you to live, to do, to achieve, now seems to have gone out, and this confuses you, because you wonder, where did that enthusiasm go? Where is that desire I had to make things happen? And this absence begins to eat away at you inside, as if something were wrong with you. But the truth is that before, you were driven by forces that came from outside. The desire to be seen, to be loved, to be validated. Maybe you sought recognition from others, the admiration of those around you, the love of someone who would confirm that you were enough. Maybe it was success, the idea of getting somewhere, of proving something, and all of this fueled you. Even if it was unstable, it kept you going. Until something happened. You began to awaken. You awoke spiritually, and everything that once seemed so important simply stopped making sense. That's where the crisis begins. Not because you've lost everything, but because you've lost your old reason for moving. The old why has died, and the new one hasn't yet been born. Now everything feels empty because you're waiting to feel the same kind of motivation as before, but it doesn't come. And it doesn't come because now you're being called to a much deeper place, a place where motivation doesn't come from outside, but springs from within. And this springing requires silence. It requires patience. It requires a kind of listening that the world doesn't teach. You don't realize it, but the painful silence is your soul's call to look within, to stop searching for meaning in things and start feeling meaning within yourself. Perhaps you remember how it was before. You had clear goals, defined plans, dreams almost always based on achieving something, on attaining something. And when you succeeded, there was that peak of euphoria. But soon after, the emptiness returned. And then you created a new goal, a new reason, and kept running. But now, even trying to repeat this cycle, something inside you refuses. Your soul no longer accepts crumbs. It wants truth. It's possible you're experiencing exactly this. You try to get excited, try to find some meaningful goal, but everything feels forced. You try talking to people, distracting yourself with content, resuming old routines, but nothing fulfills you. You feel out of place in places that once brought you joy. You feel weary in the face of things that once excited you. You feel a strange indifference even to what seemed to be your purpose. And then you start to wonder, is there something wrong with me? But there's nothing wrong. What's happening is that you're being deconstructed from within. And this deconstruction is silent, slow, and profound. It doesn't show itself to others. It's invisible to outsiders. But inside you, everything is being reconfigured. Your soul is clearing away the noise. It's undoing the invisible pacts you've made with the world. It's taking you unhurriedly to a space where the only thing that matters is what's true. But until that happens, you'll feel empty. You'll feel strange. You'll doubt yourself. It's as if the soul is whispering, "Don't try to occupy yourself to escape this. Don't try to distract yourself with false goals. Don't try to be who you were, because you're not anymore." And if you stop to listen to this whisper, something inside you begins to change. A new sensitivity emerges, a new perception. You begin to notice small signs. You begin to realize that there is something sacred even in this silence, that there is life in this not knowing, that there is a kind of healing happening even when everything seems still. Maybe you're experiencing this strange pause right now between the end of the old and the beginning of the new. Maybe you still wake up every day without energy, without direction, feeling like a stranger in your own body. But still, you keep going. Still, something inside you remains, and it's that something you need to honor. Because even without motivation, even without understanding, you're here. You're hearing this. And that means your soul hasn't given up. It means it's just waiting for the right time to blossom again, but with much deeper roots. You no longer feed on what once moved you. And this is a sign of spiritual maturity. Spiritual awakening has placed you on a new level of consciousness, where the meaning of life no longer resides in external events, but in your own presence. Where true motivation arises not from the desire to be someone else, but from the courage to be who you already are. Where what moves you is no longer the expectations of others, but the silent voice of your soul. And that voice, however soft, is speaking to you now. It's telling you that this fatigue has a purpose, that this lack of enthusiasm has a function, that this emotional neutrality is a portal, a space where the ego is silenced so the soul can begin to speak. But it takes patience. It takes listening. It takes allowing yourself to feel the discomfort without trying to escape it. Because in that discomfort, a new you is being created. If you felt that this excerpt described what you are experiencing right now, if it seems like I put into words something that you couldn't even explain, write now in the comments. I am listening to what the silence wants to tell me. He writes as someone who acknowledges, as someone who honors their own process, as someone who knows that even without answers, they are still moving forward. Because silence, when embraced, reveals truths that noise would never allow us to hear. You haven't lost your meaning. This is an illusion created by the ego, a trick of the mind that has learned throughout its life to confuse routine with purpose, productivity with value, and goals with meaning. What's actually happened is that you've escaped the collective hypnosis, the hypnosis that tells you that to be someone, you need to conquer, stand out, constantly prove something. The hypnosis that conditions your worth to the gaze of others, to recognition, to praise, to results. And when you awaken, this hypnosis dissolves, like a veil falling before your eyes, and for a time, you feel blind, because everything you saw before suddenly disappears. Rumi said, "Don't be content with stories of how things happen to others. Awaken your own legend." And that's the key, because up until now, perhaps your life has been guided by borrowed stories, other people's success models, repeated spiritual paths, truths that weren't born in you, but were inherited, taught, imposed. Maybe you followed formulas, expectations, rituals. Maybe you did everything right, but still you haven't found peace. Because no other person's story can fill the void that only your own truth can touch. And this truth, there's no set script. It reveals itself within. It demands listening, presence. It builds day after day, when you begin to trust your soul more than the voices around you. And this shift in consciousness is subtle, but profound. Because when you stop seeking it outside, you begin to realize that peace isn't in what you do, but in the intention with which you do it. It's not in what you achieve, but in what you sustain within yourself, even when everything seems absent. The new motivation that emerges after spiritual awakening is unlike anything you've ever known. It doesn't come from goals, to-do lists, or clear objectives. It comes from truth. And truth sometimes isn't comfortable. It doesn't shout. It doesn't impress, it simply exists, calm, constant like an underground river. And when you begin to live from this truth, you realize that even small gestures take on meaning. A silent coffee, a sincere look, a deep breath. Presence in an ordinary moment. Maybe you've been putting too much pressure on yourself. Maybe you're still trying to find that intense passion that drove your days, that impulsive energy that made everything seem urgent. But what if I told you that what you call passion was often disguised anxiety, a rush to get to a place that wasn't even yours, a desire to be recognized for something that didn't even represent you? Now, your soul is asking for a different rhythm. It's asking for pause. It's asking for truth. It's asking for consistency. And this consistency arises from a connection with what is essential, with what is here, now, not in the future, not in plans, but in the present moment, in the silence between one breath and the next, in the space between one thought and the next. New motivation isn't made of bursts of enthusiasm. It's made of the ground, of roots, of internal decisions that no one sees, but that sustain everything. You begin to realize that true spirituality isn't about escaping the world, nor about losing yourself in grandiose ideas. It's about becoming whole, being here, but not getting lost here, acting, but not confusing yourself with doing, feeling, but without being trapped by emotions, loving, but without being dependent. And this balance only comes when you surrender to the truth. It's not an absolute truth. It's not a truth that applies to everyone. It's yours, the one no one can take away, the one that reveals itself when you stop trying to be who the world expects and start allowing yourself to be who you truly are. And when this truth sets in, you no longer need great reasons to continue. Life itself becomes reason enough. The soul itself becomes direction. Rumi didn't say this for nothing. When he tells you not to settle for other people's stories, he's saying, stop living on autopilot. Stop repeating emotional patterns. Stop following voices that aren't yours. Awaken your own legend. And awakening here doesn't mean creating something extraordinary. It means living your truth with such presence that even the simple becomes sacred. This is the turning point. When you realize you no longer need to search outside for what was always within, that the lack of meaning was actually an excess of distraction, that the lack of motivation was merely an invitation to a new kind of movement, quieter, truer, more yours. And in this new movement there are no guarantees, there is no certainty, but there is something much more powerful. There is authenticity. You begin to live from the inside out, to make choices based on what your soul tells you, not what others expect. And even if no one understands, you understand. And that's enough. If you've made it this far, if you're feeling this transition within yourself, if you're living this phase where everything seems silent but at the same time, intensely true, write in the comments, I'm living my own legend. He writes with the awareness of someone who knows that awakening is not the end of pain, but the beginning of a new way of being. Because only those who have the courage to be who they are truly awaken. If you've stayed this far, know that it already says a lot about you. Not everyone can sustain silence. Not everyone chooses to stare into their own emptiness. But you stayed. You felt. You endured every word, even without knowing exactly where it would lead. And maybe, just maybe, it means something inside you has already begun to change. If this video has kept you engaged this far, subscribe now. This channel is more than content. It's a refuge, a mirror, a path, a journey made for those who have the courage to die and be reborn. Leave a like if something inside you was touched, not out of obligation, but as a gesture of presence. And if you still feel like you need more, if your soul still wants to be heard, watch the next video that is appearing on the screen now. It's not a continuation by chance. It's the next door, and you already have the key.